Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. 3 to 4 billion years ago, when Earth was still a young planet, life forms appeared in its primordial ocean. For almost 3 billion years, these life forms remained very small, made of a single cell for most of this period. But they multiplied, they diversified, and slowly changed the chemical composition of the seas. Then suddenly, about 540 million years ago, the number of marine species, their variety, and their sizes increased dramatically in an event called the Cambrian explosion. All sorts of creatures, mollusks, fish, crustaceans, radiated and formed more and more complex food chains. From there, they would colonize the land and sometimes return to the sea. This is the journey I invite you tonight. We're going to travel in time and discover how marine life evolved, how it appeared, or what we think we know of it. How groups of species rose to the top of their food chains and fell, and what happened when extinction events reshuffled the deck repeatedly. We will discover many extinct species of spectacular sea creatures, some of which were the largest ones to ever live on Earth, from sea scorpions and giant armored fish to marine reptiles, as well as extinct life forms that would look very strange to us. But first, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish or can, and everyone gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. If you join, you will gain access to various new features. For example, you will have the option to listen to all episodes with or without background sounds. And you can download all these audios and participate in selecting future topics. We also offer advanced releases and updates on upcoming episodes. There are also many stories only available to our Patreons. You will find a link in the description box and the first comment pinned under the video. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later, or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now we are ready to begin our exploration. And it starts 3.5 billion years ago in the depths of Earth's oceans. How and when did life begin in our planet's oceans? We just have theories about this based on geological evidence and also the formation models of Earth and the solar system. The first question is how oceans appeared. Earth formed by an accretion of space dust and asteroids containing all the elements that are now inside it and at its surface. Mostly iron, oxygen, hydrogen, silicon, and carbon. For a long time, it was thought that most of Earth's water came from other regions of the solar system and had been delivered later in its history through a bombardment of water-rich asteroids in the late stages of the formation process. Recent research tends to mitigate this view. It seems also that a lot of water could have appeared by a combination of hydrogen and oxygen that were already present directly on Earth. But the two ideas are not mutually exclusive. There is also evidence that at least some of that water was delivered to Earth by impacts from icy bodies. In any case, Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and it seems that around at least 4 billion years ago, give or take 100 million years, liquid oceans had appeared. This was thanks to the planet's cool down and its atmospheric conditions that kept enough pressure for liquid water to not evaporate. Because these first oceans were probably quite hot at their surface, hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit, we know there were oceans at the time because samples of pillow basalt, dated around 4 billion years ago, were found around the world. Pillow basalt is a type of rock that forms during underwater volcanic eruptions, so its existence is good proof that there were oceans when these basalts formed 4 billion years ago. This is for oceans, but what about life? The earliest direct evidence of life has been discovered in sedimentary rocks from Greenland and has been dated to 3.7 billion years ago. What is this evidence? Stromatolites, which are layers of sediments created by mats of microorganisms, bacteria, microbes that could live on chemical reactions using molecules that were present in these oceans, like sulfate, meaning they did not need light and photosynthesis to exist. Of course, these organisms are now fossilized, and these fossils indicate that life was present in water at least 3.7 billion years ago. Earlier than that, there is less conclusive evidence. All the layers of rock that were discovered in Canada or Australia could also be fossilized microorganisms, but their nature and their dating are more disputed. This date, when the first traces of life appeared on Earth, is not just an important debate for paleobiologists that study our planet. It is also relevant for astrobiology, the discipline that studies the hypotheses of life outside of Earth. The planet is 4.5 billion years old, as we said, and if life appeared shortly after, it is an indication that in appropriate conditions, the appearance of life on a planet is likely or can be spontaneous. But if it took hundreds of millions of years, it could suggest that the process may be rare and even may be exceptional. But what happened exactly? How did life appear out of the soup of molecules, of non-living chemicals, which floated in the ocean? And at what point does a pack of molecules qualify as a life form? Biology and research on how life might have emerged to find conditions for a life form to exist. And there are three of them. First, a living organism has to be able to replicate, to produce offspring, which are very similar to itself. Second, it must have metabolism. It must be able to feed and repair itself. Third, a living organism has an inside and an outside. There are cell membranes that allow food to enter, waste products to leave, and that exclude unwanted substances. An open question is, what was the starting point of life? Which of these conditions first appeared? It could be the appearance of RNA molecules, which are complex molecules that have the capacity to self-replicate. So a form of life or pre-life that did not necessarily have metabolism or membranes that separated from its environment could have appeared just based on the replication of RNA molecules. Or the first phenomenon to emerge could have been metabolism. Chemistry indicates that given the right conditions of temperature and pressure, proteins can form from inorganic material, like carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide, if they are in the presence of the right catalysts, iron and sulfur. And these conditions were probably available in the depths of the Earth's oceans near hydrothermal vents, these natural chimneys that eject heat and chemicals from Earth's mantle. Or the first step could have been the appearance of membranes. Again, chemical conditions on the early Earth were appropriate for lipid molecules to form, and in water, these lipids tend to form bubbles with double walls that create an inside and an outside. This inside might have been the protected environment where other functions could appear. There is no definitive answer to this, but what we know is that around 4 billion years ago, these three functions, replication, metabolism, and separation from the environment by membranes, had come together in the first single-cell organisms. Another hypothesis for the appearance of life on Earth is called panspermia, the possibility that life arrived on Earth from space, or if not life, some of its basic components. It is true that some microorganisms have been proven able to survive the shock of being catapulted into space. So it is theoretically possible, with the intense bombardment of asteroids that happened on the early Earth. Maybe a few simple living organisms arrived like this. They found a suitable environment and multiplied on Earth. Now, it doesn't tell us how life appeared originally. It displaces the question by making it come from another planet or another star system, maybe. So these various hypotheses, possibilities about the appearance of life directly on Earth or its arrival from somewhere else, coexist at this point. None of them are proven, though they appear possible. What we know with more certainty is that at least 3.7 billion years ago, the first single-cell organisms lived and replicated in the oceans, probably in the dark. Photosynthesis, the use of sunlight as an energy source, had not appeared yet, and these life forms lived from chemical reactions based on the elements they found in water. They were bacteria and archaea, two different kinds of single-cell organisms. Around 3.5 billion years ago, a new form of life chemistry appeared with photosynthesis, the conversion of light energy, of sunlight, into chemical energy that can be later released to fuel the organism's activities. The waste product of photosynthesis is oxygen, and the multiplication of single-cell creatures living from photosynthesis had a dramatic impact on the composition of the oceans because they became richer and richer in oxygen that these organisms ejected as waste products of their feeding cycle. The concentration of oxygen rose steadily for 1 billion years until the oceans became saturated and oxygen began to escape into the atmosphere. This happened around 2.4 billion years ago. This phenomenon is called the Great Oxygenation Event, and it paved the way to life on Earth as we know it today, completely transforming the composition of the seas and the atmosphere that initially contained almost no free oxygen. You know that the evolution and classification of species is often represented as a kind of tree. Species branch out, their characteristics change slowly, and they diverge, giving birth to new branches, new organisms. But if there is an evolutionary tree, a phylogenetic tree, as it is called, that is the complicated word for it, and if you can follow its branches and diversifications into all species that have existed, it means you can follow it up in reverse, looking for the first, the most ancient ancestor from which other organisms diverged. This primordial organism, a population that would be the ancestor of all known life, is called Luca, L-U-C-K, for last universal common ancestor. It is not just a concept, it is a hypothesis based on the observation that all known life forms, ocean-bound or on land, from bacteria to the largest organisms, including plants, fungi, or humans, carry a portion of their genome that is common. It is believed that these common genes, this universal piece of information, comes from the last universal common ancestor. It is hypothesized that it was a single-cell organism that lived about 4 billion years ago in the high-temperature waters of hydrothermal vents near ocean floors. It is not necessarily the first life form ever on Earth, just the one ancestral to existing life. But maybe there were other experiments of nature that have disappeared or remain undiscovered. Marine life evolved apparently very slowly for hundreds of millions of years, from 4 billion years ago to 610 million years ago. The fossil record indicates that life remained based on single-cell microscopic organisms until something clicked. Possibly a minor genetic change that allowed organisms to become made of multiple cells. Thus, the first viable, bigger life forms appeared in the seas, apparently independently. Organisms like sponges or brown algae. Sponges, which have existed since then and still populate our seas, are a unique kind of animal. They are similar to other animals in that they are multicellular. They start small and they grow. They feed on external resources like bacteria. However, they lack true tissue and have no organs. They attach to underwater structures and remain in place, feeding on bacteria that float through their structure. They use calcium carbonate or silicon dioxide in water to build a kind of flexible skeleton. Brown algae, which are another group with thousands of known species, are also very ancient multicellular life forms. Some are attached to the seafloor, while others float freely in mats, always near the surface because they live on photosynthesis. And like sponges, they have evolved since 600 million years ago. But their group has survived every single extinction event since then. The first multicellular organisms were just a taste of what was about to happen. The fossil record indicates that suddenly, over a relatively short period of time, on a geological scale, 13 to 25 million years ago, the number of species, and especially larger species, rose considerably. This happened around 540 million years ago. This sudden diversification has been called the Cambrian explosion, or sometimes the biological Big Bang. In this relatively short period of time, the oceans became populated with larger, more varied, and more complex animals. Almost all present-day body plans of animals can be traced back to this period, the Cambrian explosion. It was a period of intense experimentation by nature, if you will. So what did these new animals, bigger than anything before, look like? There was a wealth of small mollusks with shells. They were still tiny, around 1 or 2 millimeters. But they took on a variety of shapes. Some looked like snails, others had the typical hard shells on their upper and lower surfaces, a bit like mussels. There were tubes, and sometimes we find elements in fossilized layers from the period that show us body parts with spines or armor plates. But we don't know how these parts were arranged. Apart from these small shells, there were bigger animals, including echinoderms. Echinoderms are better known as starfish or sea urchins, but this group also included other animals like sea cucumbers and the first trilobites that would populate the oceans for almost 300 million years. Trilobites ranged from a few millimeters to over 12 inches, 30 centimeters, and they are the earliest known form of arthropods. Arthropods represent one of two possible body organizations for relatively large animals that have harder parts. You can be a vertebrate and have a skeleton with flesh and organs around it, like us, but also like fish, dinosaurs, or birds. Or you can have an exoskeleton that protects soft tissue and organs inside. Scorpions, crabs, centipedes, or butterflies are arthropods. They have this exoskeleton and a segmented body for movement. They are an extreme diverse group in seas and on land, which shows their adaptability. But their body plan comes with a limitation in terms of size. In order to keep growing, they need to go through stages of molting. That is to say, they have to shed their exoskeleton to reveal a new one, flexible at first, that allows them to grow. As we are going to see, arthropods had a strong start as predators in the oceans of the Cambrian and the Ordovician periods. The Ordovician is the period that followed the Cambrian. Giant sea scorpions appeared that were at the top of the food chain, and we know them relatively well because their exoskeletons fossilized easily. So we have abundant evidence of their existence that lasted for millions of years. These creatures evolved into many ecological niches. Some lived near the seabed as predators or scavengers. Others swam and fed by filtering plankton. And some even crawled onto land as one of the species that began later to colonize the new environment out of the water. Ancient echinoderms like starfish, trilobites, and these different kinds of mollusks with shells look familiar to us because these animals are the ancestors of others that have retained their body plans. But it seems that during the intense experimentation or proliferation of life forms during the Cambrian explosion, many more organisms that would now look really strange also appeared. We know some of them thanks to well-preserved soft parts that were found in the Burgess Shale, a site in British Columbia, Canada, and after that in various other sites around the world that are dated from the Cambrian period. These sites revealed an ecosystem with the various families I just discussed, but also very weird-looking creatures that apparently did not survive into later periods. One example is Opabinia, the name given to a soft-bodied animal with a slim and segmented body that carried flap-like appendages on each segment, 5 eyes, and a mouth that faced backwards under the head, as if the various body parts we are familiar with in animals had been redistributed in a way that has no living equivalent today. Another example is Odontogryphus, a flat and oval soft-bodied animal that apparently had a single muscular foot and a kind of shell on its back. Yet another creature of the Cambrian, and the one considered to be one of the first examples of an apex predator, a predator that has no predator, was an early anthropod called Anomalocaris, literally meaning abnormal shrimp. It had a body length of about 40 centimeters, 1.3 feet. Doesn't sound like a lot, but with a size like that in the oceans of the Cambrian, it was a gigantic organism. It propelled itself in the water by undulating, flexible flaps on the sides of its body, and it had two flexible appendages on the front, presumably to catch prey and bring them to its mouth. It also had a pair of eyes, an evolution that existed in other arthropods, but Anomalocaris probably had the best eyes of its time. They were comparatively enormous, more than 1 inch, which probably gave it a huge advantage as a hunter in shallow waters. There were few fish yet. We'll talk about fish in a minute. And it is believed Anomalocaris preyed on other arthropods and mollusks. 488 million years ago, the Cambrian period ended. Like all the periods we will talk about, the end of a period and the beginning of another one was marked by an extinction event. This is how these different periods have been established. An extinction event, that is to say, a quick reduction in the number of species, especially the largest ones, generally revealed by fossil records. The following period is called Ordovician, and I'm not going to detail all the periods one by one to our times, because there is a dozen. Despite extinctions between them, species disappeared, but classes of animals continued through these periods. The Ordovician period deserves to be mentioned, though, because it started when the Cambrian ended and lasted for 42 million years. During it, a second major radiation, a flourishing of life of the same magnitude as the Cambrian explosion, happened. It is during this period that the complexity of marine ecosystems deepened to the levels that have characterized marine life to our days. The number of genera, the groups of species, was multiplied by 4 during the Ordovician era. Fish evolved from earlier forms and began to acquire jaws at the end of the period. Mollusks became bigger and more evolved, with cephalopods like Nautilus becoming large animals. New predators appeared, like sea scorpions and a giant cephalopod shaped like a cone called Orthoceras. That's a lot of words. What does it all mean? Let's take things one by one. Fish are marine vertebrates. They have an internal skeleton, including a skull, breathe underwater, and lack limbs with digits. The earliest ancestors of fish, the first organisms that can be classified as such, appear during the Cambrian period. They lacked a true spine at first, but they had a flexible rod called the notochord, similar in structure to cartilage. The skeleton of modern fish is made of cartilage, but notochords are not as stiff. Even though notochords are not cartilage or bones, they gave them a structure and agility that invertebrates didn't have. They could swim, accelerate, change depth, and later hunt better than other families of Cambrian animals. This characteristic allowed them to find a place and thrive in the late Cambrian and Ordovician periods, diversifying into a wide variety of forms. At the end of the Ordovician, or the beginning of the following period, the Silurian, they acquired jaws, and some of their representatives became formidable marine predators rather than the prey of arthropods like sea scorpions. Fish predators might make us think about sharks, but the time of the sharks had not arrived yet. They appeared also during the Ordovician, but they were much smaller than they would become, and they fell somewhere in the middle of the food chain, feeding on small animals and being prey to larger fish and arthropods. Many modern sharks can be traced back to about 100 million years ago, long after the Ordovician, during the Jurassic period. From there, they slowly moved up to the top of the food chain in the ocean, culminating rather recently, 23 to 4 million years ago, with the megalodon, a species of giant shark that is regarded as one of the largest and most powerful marine predators that have ever lived. It could have reached up to 66 feet, 20 meters, with an astonishing speed and bite force that left it with no equivalent at the time it lived. The modern great shark is thought to be a relative, but the two diverged during the Cretaceous period, though they are not part of the exact same family. Even though the megalodon may have looked like a much bigger great white shark, we don't know exactly what it looked like, because sharks' skeletons are made of cartilage rather than bones and don't fossilize well. There is no full fossil megalodon, only separate vertebrae, jaws, and teeth, from which the characteristics of the animal are extrapolated. The age of the megalodon was almost yesterday in geological terms. It ended 4 million years ago. But if we return to the Ordovician, 450 million years ago, sharks were more modest. Before their time arrived, the first true fish apex predators would be a class of armored fish called placoderms. As they gained in size, these fish developed armored plates on their head and thorax during the Silurian period, 440 to 420 million years ago. They acquired very powerful jaws, and it seems an evolutionary race took place between bigger and bigger placoderms with more powerful jaws and protective armor. By the end of their domination, 360 million years ago, many of the largest placoderms belonged to a genus, a group of species called Dunkleosteus. These are relatively well known because their heads and armor plates fossilized very well. The largest species is estimated to have grown up to 29 feet, 9 meters in length, and weighed up to 4 tons. Their strength, and especially their bite force, suggests that they hunted other placoderms and crushed their helmet plates. Placoderms became extinct at the end of the Devonian period, 360 million years ago, after a reign of dozens of millions of years in the Earth's oceans. But the story of fish continues with their diversity and their ability to adapt to different environments, whether marine or freshwater, at different depths. These adaptations ensured their survival. Today, fish have more than 30,000 different described species, and there are probably many more at great depths, which makes them the most diverse of all groups of vertebrates. But returning to ancient vertebrates, they were not the only ones to gain in size and strength. Mollusks and arthropods also evolved significantly. A large group that flourished at the time was the nautiloids, which still exist but used to be much bigger and more abundant than they are today. They are mollusks living and swimming in shells that can be of different shapes, coiled or sometimes straight like cones. One of their representatives that dominated the seas long before the rise of armed fish was a genus called Orthoceras, literally straight horn. It had a very long, straight shell shaped like a cone, and it could be up to 11 meters long, more than 30 feet, and they used tentacles to catch prey. But all these are just a few examples of marine ecosystems that were probably already close to the diversity we know today. Many families flourished, including corals, starfish, sponges, all sorts of mollusks and trilobites, and plenty of tiny crustaceans. As I mentioned, arthropods also participated in the size race, particularly with eurypterids, also known as sea scorpions. These sea scorpions became a major component of marine fauna until 420 million years ago, before declining and disappearing 250 million years ago. Although earlier species were only marine, later ones may have had a dual respiratory system that allowed them to venture on land for short periods of time. They had the broad morphology of a scorpion, but with different proportions. Their pincers to manipulate food were not very big, and their bodies were sturdier. A size of 3.5 feet was common for them, even though there were much smaller ones, and also the largest known arthropod that ever existed, a genus called Echinopterus. I told you before that arthropods were somewhat limited in size by their exoskeleton and the necessity to shed it to grow. Another limitation is the respiratory system, especially for land arthropods. They don't have lungs similar to vertebrates, and it is believed to be the reason why land arthropods never reached great sizes. They cannot breathe enough to sustain a large and compact body. The largest arthropods to have lived out of water were prehistoric dragonflies that could be much larger than modern insects, with a wingspan of several feet. That is still not huge compared to vertebrates. It is believed the air was richer in oxygen at that time. These same species of dragonflies could no longer survive in our modern atmosphere. So the largest ever arthropod was aquatic, and it could reach around 8 feet, 2.5 meters. But it is uncertain if it really lived in the sea. The layers in which Eucalyptus fossils were found suggest that it could have lived in a freshwater environment. Maybe. Millions and millions of years passed, during which these various animals thrived and declined. After the Ordovician came the Silurian and the Devonian, sometimes called the Age of Fish, when armored fish dominated the seas. On land, the first plants had begun to spread, and large parts of the continents now looked green. The following period, the Carboniferous, is when future reserves of coal and oil began to form, as for millions of years this vegetation became trapped under layers of sediments, and the process of coalification began. The seas of the Carboniferous were still teeming with life, but some of the earliest groups of complex species, such as trilobites, were now declining. But fish were thriving. The age of placoderms, these sometimes very large armored fish, had ended, but sharks were multiplying. Fish species that we would find relatively familiar coexisted with extinct fish species that would look extremely weird to us. Fish like Acmonistian, looking like a small shark but with a large dorsal fin that looked a bit like an anvil of unknown function, or the coelacanths, bony fishes that are related to the ancestors of tetrapods. The tetrapods are the first amphibians that colonized the land. For a long time, coelacanths were thought to have disappeared in the late Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, until 1938, when living coelacanths were discovered off the coast of South Africa. For that reason, it was called a living fossil, because following this discovery, scientists believed that they were the sole remaining member of a group that was thought to be extinct, and that they had remained unchanged for tens of millions of years. This view of the coelacanths was a bit exaggerated because, since then, other studies have revealed that coelacanths' body shapes are much more diverse than thought. And yes, they have changed since the Cretaceous. But still, this fish appeared 400 million years ago, and their descendants still live in our oceans, looking almost the same. The 6 periods from the Cambrian, when the Cambrian explosion took place, to the Carboniferous, and finally another period called Permian, are grouped together in larger divisions of time. An era called the Paleozoic era. Literally, Paleozoic means ancient life. Why group these 6 periods together into an era? Because at the end of the Permian, a particularly large and catastrophic extinction event took place, one that affected much more than in between these periods. It did not fully reset marine life. Many of the different categories of animals that we have discussed made it to the following era, the Mesozoic, middle life, but the number of species dropped dramatically, and all their large representatives were wiped out. It took life millions of years to recover into this new era, the Mesozoic, and its first period, 250 to 200 million years ago, called the Triassic. The rulers of the seas that emerged during this period would be quite different from the arthropods, mollusks, and armored fish that had dominated during the Paleozoic. This new age saw the rise in size and strength of marine reptiles. The apex predators and many other medium-sized species would now be reptiles that had transitioned back from land to sea and become adapted to full-time aquatic life, even though they kept breathing air. They include the ichthyosaurs that look like dolphins or fish, except they were reptiles, and the sauropterygians, which at the time came in a variety of sizes and shapes, including placodonts that developed armor on their backs that made them look a little bit like turtles, even though they were not turtles, or plesiosaurs. Speaking of turtles, the Triassic is also when these particular reptiles appeared on Earth. Their main characteristic, the shell on their back that enclosed all the vital organs of the turtle, is made of bone that develops from their rib cage and is covered in scales made of keratin. Keratin is a material of hair, horns, or claws that many animals can grow, including us humans. As the Mesozoic advanced into a new period, the Jurassic, the time when dinosaurs dominated the land, marine life saw a few innovations. These include the first modern crabs and also the earliest octopuses. We are now 200 million years ago, and these mollusks with 8 limbs first appeared near the seafloor in shallow marine environments. Most of their body is soft tissue, and for that reason fossils are relatively rare, but enough were found to figure out their evolutionary history. From the first mollusks of the Cambrian that branched out several times, giving birth to a large category called cephalopods. Cephalopods appeared 530 million years ago and are characterized by a symmetrical body, prominent head, and a set of arms or tentacles. They also have a common ability to squirt ink to surprise or escape. Cephalopods split a few times into new families like nautiloids, or the one that includes squids and cuttlefish. And finally, 155 million years ago, octopods, of which all octopuses are part. Modern species have changed since the Jurassic, but they retain the same body characteristics, and they have been quite good at adapting to different depths and environments. Their sizes range from 1 inch to 14 feet for the largest modern species, the giant Pacific octopus, but exceptionally bigger sizes have been claimed for a few specimens up to 30 feet. They don't really have much time to grow because their lifespan is relatively short. Once males have fertilized a female, they enter a process of senescence. That is to say, their cellular functions gradually stop without repair or replacement, which leads to death in a few weeks or months at most. For females, it happens when they lay a clutch of eggs. They spend their last days caring for their eggs without feeding, and when the eggs hatch, they die. An exception is the Pacific striped octopus that can reproduce several times, but it still doesn't live more than 2 years. This short lifespan is probably a big limitation because octopuses have been proven to be highly intelligent for invertebrates. They have a complex nervous system, which is only partially localized in their brains. 2/3 of their neurons are in their arms, and they have a high brain-to-body ratio. Intelligence does not depend just on the size of the brain. But in the case of octopuses, they have been observed to be good at problem solving, like finding and remembering the exit to a maze or opening containers. And they have both short-term and long-term memory. They can train and learn in a way that is quite extraordinary in the animal realm. What limits them is their short life and the absence of transmission to the young. Females typically die as the eggs are hatching, like I mentioned, so every new generation has to start over, which excludes an accumulation of experience and knowledge like for humans. But who knows if in the next million years, an evolution like a mutation of their genome could give octopuses a longer lifespan and the possibility to educate their young. There could theoretically be an emergence of a new species able to accumulate experience. But the interesting thing would be that most species that have shown intelligence are mammals, whereas octopuses have a very different architecture of their nervous system. After the Jurassic, the Mesozoic ended with its last period, the Cretaceous. Marine ecosystems were still dominated by marine reptiles, except Ichthyosaurus declined, and a group of new, sometimes very large predators emerged, the Mosasaurus. At the end of the Cretaceous and the Mesozoic, a major catastrophic extinction event occurred, one that wiped out dinosaurs, though not entirely, since it is believed that birds are a surviving branch. But all non-avian dinosaurs disappeared on land, and all large species also went missing, putting an end to the age of marine reptiles. And again, not all of them, as sea turtles made it to the following period, the Paleogene. During the Paleogene, life slowly radiated again, but this time the new masters of the seas would be sharks, which we already discussed, occupying the niches left vacant, and cetaceans, which also transitioned from land to sea as marine reptiles had done 200 million years earlier. Also the rise of whales and their diversification, such as hunting whales, that today include dolphins, orcas, and sperm whales, and filter-feeding whales, like blue whales and other species. They are still predators today, but somewhat more peaceful than their predecessors like Basilosaurus, which was the marine apex predator 40 to 34 million years ago. Finally, in the Neogene and the Quaternary periods, the Quaternary is our period, marine life took its modern form after hundreds of millions of years of evolution, with the coexistence of very ancient organisms like sponges or simple mollusks, a huge variety of fish or corals, and thousands of species that emerged since, from octopods, crustaceans, and turtles to cetaceans. A world of beauty, at the same time fragile but extremely resilient and adaptable, as we have seen all along our journey. And buried in the layers of sediments, this marine world includes the remains of thousands upon thousands of species, large and small, that appeared, flourished for thousands of generations, and went extinct due to competition from others or a change in their environment that they could not adapt to, or extinction events. All of these forms are in our modern oceans, a world we have learned about a lot in the past few decades, but that is still full of mystery, of unknown and undescribed species, of unfamiliar ecosystems, especially in the depths of the abyss, where pressure is enormous and where there is no sunlight. Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. Tonight we will embark on a long, long journey and explore the earlier ages of our planet. I'm going to tell you about dinosaurs in general. We'll talk about the definition of what a dinosaur is and what it is not. And I will also tell you about the history of paleontology, the study of fossils, the evolution of species, and what we know about particular types or species of dinosaurs. For the most part, the information I'm going to share with you tonight is based only on theories and the understanding of the ancient ages of our world. The theories about this are in constant evolution, so they should be taken as a work in progress, as a state of knowledge that could be altered or even changed in the future. But before we begin, assume a comfortable position. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you exhale, release the tension in your shoulders, your neck. Release the tension in your facial muscles too, and allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. Long before our species even existed, imagine you are flying above Earth 150 million years ago during the Jurassic period. Long before the Jurassic, all the land mass on Earth had gathered into a single giant continent, Pangaea, a supercontinent that existed between 280 and 230 million years ago. It broke up during the Jurassic due to plate tectonics, and its northern half, Laurentia, broke again into North America and Eurasia as a rift that became the Atlantic Ocean opened between them. The other half in the south, a continent called Gondwana, also broke up later, and its split made Africa, South America, India, and Australia. But seen from above, the Earth's continents looked nothing like they do today. The climate was also different. It was warmer and more humid. Like in subtropical regions nowadays, The oceans contained abundant and diverse life. At the top of the food chains were the long-necked plesiosaurs. There were also sharks and giant marine crocodiles, and in many of the new seas that appeared with fractioning of Pangea, there was an abundance of coral reefs, sponges, mollusks, ammonites, or squid-like animals. And who ruled their lands? The largest land creatures to ever live on the surface, dinosaurs. There were small species of dinosaurs just a foot long. There were medium-sized species, and then there were giants, like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, or Tyrannosaurus. These species did not live all at the same time. They didn't live everywhere either. Some of them may never have been able to meet because they were too far apart. Just like an Indian tiger and the North American grizzly could never meet in nature today. But everywhere on the planet and for dozens of millions of years, dinosaurs thrived. But what is and what is not a dinosaur? There is a general definition of the term, a general understanding in common language. That would tend to include all reptile-like creatures that lived in ancient periods on our planet. This definition appeared in the 19th century with the first discoveries of dinosaur fossils, and it includes creatures that are not dinosaurs, according to paleontologists today. For example, there are species sometimes mistaken for dinosaurs that appeared and went extinct before the dinosaurs. An example is Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon lived 290 to 270 million years ago. This is twice as far in the past as the Jurassic period relative to us. It was not a dinosaur, even though it looked like one. It had a large spined sail on its back that probably served either to regulate its temperature or was used in courtship display and to threaten rivals, or both. But Dimetrodon was not a reptile. It was actually closer to mammals than modern reptiles, and it went extinct 40 million years before the very first dinosaurs. Another group of animals commonly mistaken for dinosaurs is pterosaurs. They belong to a group called Pterosauria that went extinct, and they are not related to modern birds in any way. And finally, sea reptiles like Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus are not dinosaurs either. So, what would be the definition of a dinosaur? Whatever the size, what dinosaurs have in common is that they belong to the same branch of the evolutionary tree. They belong to the same clade. So what is a clade? It is a way in biology of classifying organisms based on their relation to a common ancestor. Imagine a tree of life with all species. The clade is a branch of this tree. It starts with a species or a population and includes all its lineal descendants, other organisms that evolved from it. This is what dinosaurs have in common: an ancestor. Other creatures that may have looked like them or lived during the same period are not classified as dinosaurs because they belong to another branch. Clades are nested. They can contain smaller clades as the evolution of species leads to significant divergences in the tree of life. In the case of dinosaurs, there are two main branches to the clade. Fossil records indicate that during the late Jurassic period, the lineage of dinosaurs with feathers developed and formed a branch of evolution called avian dinosaurs, also known as birds. This branch survived the extinction of the other branch, the non-avian dinosaurs, and it thrives until our time. So, in this sense, the clade of dinosaurs is still alive and well. They are around us even though the non-avian dinosaurs are no more. But for tonight, we're going to focus on non-avian dinosaurs, so we will leave the birds aside for now. This approach, in relation to the classification of species, has revolutionized biology in the past 50 years. It has now become mainstream within the scientific community and clashes a bit with the previous traditional classification of species that was in use in previous centuries. Some terms are still used in everyday language that no longer make much sense in biology and zoology. Historically, organisms were classified based on their morphological similarities. This is how groups like reptiles were named, for example. However, sometimes two animals sharing apparently similar morphologies can be quite far apart in the evolutionary tree. They end up looking alike out of efficiency, because this morphology works within their environment in a phenomenon called convergent evolution. But based on their lineage, animals called reptiles can have very different ancestors. For example, a crocodile or an alligator is more closely related to a bird than to a lizard. We know this through the study of DNA fossil records, the study of bones, and the morphology of scales. If we take a look at the enlarged family of dinosaurs and search for the group to which their clade belongs, we need to move a few million years back in time, around 250 million years ago. Dinosaurs are part of a larger group, a larger clade called archosaurs, which includes not only non-avian and avian dinosaurs, but also their descendants. It also includes crocodilians and pterosaurs, the flying animals that lived during the same period as dinosaurs. Although not part of the same family, pterosaurs are close relatives. The classification in clades looks a bit more complicated and sometimes not very intuitive for non-biologists, because the classification of a particular species in a clade requires detailed analysis of its remains, morphology, and other comparable organisms. It is a convention based on research, argumentation, and nowadays complex algorithms. This approach, based on evolution, has allowed various breakthroughs in the understanding of life forms. The classification of birds and the lineage of dinosaurs is one. But to make a quick digression, there are other examples. Another one revealed by molecular biology and genetics is the understanding that all sorts of fungi including yeasts, molds, or mushrooms, are actually more closely related to animals than they are to plants. The traditional distinction between fauna and flora, between animals and plants, is questioned by the existence of fungi. They are not animals because, among other things, they cannot move. They are not plants either. They share characteristics with animals, such as the way they feed. They dissolve molecules with digestive enzymes, so they are somewhere in between plants and animals. They have their own kingdom, and this was confirmed by the discovery that all fungi share a common ancestor and are parts of the same clade, distinct from other life forms. But let's return to non-avian dinosaurs. The clade appeared between 243 and 233 million years ago, during a period called the Triassic. It is known that some periods in Earth's history have been defined by extinction events. Records show a pattern of repetition throughout the history of our planet. Life tended to develop and diversify for periods lasting millions of years until dramatic shifts in conditions occurred. These shifts could result from climatic changes or external events, such as massive asteroid impact. The theories regarding these events remain a topic of discussion, suggesting that they may have been caused by a single event or a combination of various factors. Regardless, these events led to a rapid reduction in species diversity. It is important to note that quick or rapid in this context does not mean instantaneous. These extinction events could have spanned several million years, but they appear quick because the time intervals between them are longer, especially considering the vast timescale of the past. So, the so-called Triassic period covers about 50 million years, from 250 to 200 million years ago. This is when the first dinosaurs walked on the continent Pangaea, before it broke up into Laurentia and Gondwana. It is believed that most of Pangaea had a continental climate because of its size, which limited the moderating effect of the global oceans surrounding it. This meant hot summers and cold winters. On average, the planet was warmer than today, and the atmosphere was less rich in oxygen, about 80% of current levels. The oceans were dominated by ichthyosaurs and the first plesiosaurs, which are two orders of marine reptiles. The land mass was populated by many reptiles too. Some of them were herbivores, such as the rhynchosaurs. Others were predators like the phytosaur. These ones look like modern crocodiles, even though they were not. There were other archosaurs like raccoons that were also animals, related to mammals, such as the cynodonts, which may have had fur as a means of temperature regulation. And among them appeared the first dinosaurs. But they had humble beginnings in the Triassic. They were only 3 to 6 feet long. That's 1 or 2 meters. And they hunted small prey in the shadow of larger predators. One of the first known dinosaurs is called Coelophysis. Its remains were found in what is now the southwestern United States and also in South Africa. Silophysis was relatively small and slender, a carnivore. The largest specimens discovered were about 9 feet long, from the head to the tip of the tail. Its weight did not exceed 20 kilograms, or about 40 pounds. The shape of the skull suggested that it had large, forward-facing eyes that gave it a good perception of depth. It is believed to have hunted during the day and hidden at night under the cover of forests. Before Silophysis, there was an even smaller dinosaur called Eoraptor. It could have been the size of a medium-sized dog and weighed up to 20 pounds. It was probably a fast runner and a hunter, searching for small mammals or insects. It is believed that Eoraptor could be or resemble the common ancestor of all dinosaurs. Early dinosaurs probably had to hide from bigger and more successful predators. But contrary to them, and maybe because they were not at the top of the food chain, they avoided extinction. Even before the end of the Triassic, larger carnivores and herbivores went extinct, which left more room for dinosaurs in the ecosystems. The first few lines of dinosaurs diversified before the end of the Triassic, and then came another mass extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, which occurred 201 million years ago. This event happened very quickly, in less than 10,000 years, just before the continent Pangaea started to break into smaller pieces. This mass extinction was not as drastic as the previous one that started the Triassic period. It is estimated that the Permian-Triassic extinction saw the disappearance of 96% of marine species, 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. This time during the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, only around 30% of marine species and 40% of terrestrial species disappeared. The reasons for this extinction are still debated. They could include a rapid climate change that may have reached a tipping point, or an asteroid impact, but no large enough crater has been found from the same period. However, the asteroid could have hit a place that was later submerged, or it could have fallen into the ocean. It could also be due to massive volcanism. The extinction happened about the time when Pangaea was separating, and volcanoes could have released a huge amount of gases that could have changed the climate, either warming or cooling it. Either way, the extinction happened and the dinosaurs came out on top in the reorganization of land ecosystems. The first few lines of the dinosaurs' extinction marked a significant turning point. However, after the commencement of the Jurassic period, approximately 200 million years ago, their descendants emerged and gradually occupied the primary ecological niche. This remarkable evolutionary development led to a diverse array of species taking on crucial roles within their respective ecosystems. The Jurassic was a golden age for large herbivore dinosaurs that grew in size dramatically. These are known as the sauropods. An example of sauropods is Brachiosaurus. Brachiosaurus lived in what is North America today. During the late Jurassic, around 153 million years ago. It is estimated to have been between 60 and 70 feet long for adults – and have weighed 30 to 60 tons. Distinctive features of sauropods include their very long neck, their small skull, and their huge size. There are other species related to Brachiosaurus, which have been discovered around the world. The small difference is probably due to the separation of the landmass during the Jurassic, which caused regional divergences between groups that could no longer be in contact. With this anatomy, brachiosaurs and other sauropods are considered high browsers. They probably ate leaves from trees, dropping vegetation as high as 30 feet. For a long time, it was believed that large sauropods could not regulate their temperature. Because of their similarities with other cold-blooded reptiles and their size, warming the entire system would have required a lot of energy. However, recent research suggests that they were warm-blooded and could be more active than previously believed. Some sauropods could be much larger than brachiosaurs and may have been the largest land animal to ever exist, as far as we know. Bigger sauropods appeared long after the Jurassic period, well after Brachiosaurus. During the following period, the Cretaceous, the largest known dinosaur belonged to a group called Titanosaurs. Their fossil remains were discovered in the south of South America. There are species called Patagotitan or Argentosaurus, which would have been 120 feet long, with a weight of more than 70 tons. This is twice as big as Brachiosaurus. We can never be sure that our knowledge of dinosaur species is exhaustive. It is very certainly not. About 1,000 different species have been identified, but this is not much for a group that existed for a long time. Very few fossilized remains, and even fewer remains accessible millions of years later. We may have a reasonably good knowledge of larger dinosaurs because their remains are big and easier to find and date. However, there are probably hundreds, maybe thousands, of dinosaur species that remain undiscovered. Our knowledge of the ecosystem remains fragmented. Alongside sauropods, other smaller herbivores thrived during the Jurassic because they were not protected from predators by their sides like sauropods. They developed other means of protection, including armor. A group contemporary to Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus is Stegosauria. This group developed tail spikes, very probably as defensive weapons, and as their size increased and made them less and less able to run from a threat, their armor increased in size and thickness, and it was also harder. Stegosauria had arrays of spikes and blades running along their backs and their tails too. Stegosauria is a large group that diversified a lot in shape and size, depending on the regions where they lived around the world. Contrary to early dinosaurs that walked on two legs, they couldn't stand and stayed on four limbs. Their heads became comparatively small, and they stayed low, close to the ground, indicating that they specialized in collecting vegetation on the ground, or just a bit above. They probably never competed with sauropods for food. The scutes on their back were made of bone. However, they were not attached to the skeleton. It is the skin that's ossified to create them. as the young specimen grew up. And another very famous type armored herbivore dinosaur is a Triceratops. But there is no chance it could have met a Stegosaurus. Triceratops appeared at the end of the age of dinosaurs, around 68 million years ago. As far as we know, Stegosaurus went extinct 60 million years prior to the appearance of Triceratops. Because non-avian dinosaurs did not disappear with the Jurassic, they continued to thrive during the following era, the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous ended with another massive extinction 66 million years ago. Actually, many dinosaurs associated with the word Jurassic never existed during this period. Apart from Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus is another example of this. It is from the late Cretaceous, and it could not have met earlier species, but it could have fought Triceratops. They are from the same period, and their remains were both found in North America. Triceratops literally means three-horned face. It had a large four-legged body. It was one of the biggest herbivores living in the late Cretaceous, with a weight of about 12 tons when adult. The characteristic horns have long been seen or theorized as defensive weapons, but this remains controversial. Could have also have been means of identification and dominance display. As for the antlers and horns of modern species, we don't know. Triceratops was probably preyed upon by Tyrannosaurus, arguably the most popular and famous dinosaur. Tyrannosaurus is the name of a group, with the most famous being Tyrannosaurus rex, or T-Rex for short. It is well known through fossils found in various rock formations in North America. Contrary to herbivorous dinosaurs that tended to evolve towards smaller heads, Tyrannosaurus had a very big head with a massive skull, balanced by a long and heavy tail. Its four limbs were short, but relatively strong for their size. Tyrannosaurus rex is believed to have the strongest bite force among all terrestrial animals ever. Other carnivorous dinosaurs could compete in size or even exceed it, but they had disappeared when the age of Tyrannosaurus began. It was by far the largest carnivore in its environment. Its lifestyle is hypothetical, but given its morphology and diet, it appears likely that it was an apex predator that preyed upon herbivorous dinosaurs, including maybe the largest sauropods, when they were young or too old to defend themselves. However, it could also have been a scavenger. Most paleontologists today admit that it was a bit of both, probably. Before Tyrannosaurus, other large carnivorous dinosaurs existed, and they had a rather small appearance. For example, Allosaurus, which was at the top of the food chain 80 million years before Tyrannosaurus could have battled with a Stegosaurus during the Jurassic period. Comparable predators, but smaller and probably quicker, also existed. For example, there was a group called Deinonychus at the beginning of the Cretaceous. These ones are famous under their name Velociraptors because of the Jurassic Park movies. But velociraptors in the real world were much smaller than that. They were feathered dinosaurs, and they were about the size of a big turkey, very far from the velociraptors in the movies, which are recreations using the morphology from one species and the name from another species that did not live at the same time. As I mentioned before, some dinosaurs were feathered, but unless feathers have been fossilized, which rarely happens, it is difficult to know which ones. It is also impossible to know what color they were. They are often presented in shades of brown or green, or they may be gray, due to the comparison with modern reptiles and the history of their discovery. Since the first discoveries of fossilized remains of dinosaurs during the 19th century, the understanding of dinosaurs and theories about them have changed dramatically. Paleontology, which is a scientific study of life that existed prior to the start of our epoch, developed mainly in the 19th century. This science itself has also changed a lot since then, with contributions from many other branches of science and techniques, such as chemistry, biology, and engineering. In the past 2 centuries, paleontologists have been able to elaborate on hypotheses about the evolutionary history of life, almost all the way back to when Earth began to support life. The study of dinosaurs is just one aspect of paleontology. Even though it's often the most visible one, there are many others. Dinosaur fossils were known long ago, even before paleontology became a recognized field. Some had been discovered in China hundreds of years ago, where they were documented as dragon bones, leading people to believe in the existence of dragons. In Europe, these fossils were initially thought to be remains of giants or biblical creatures. One of the first groups of dinosaurs to be identified was Iguanodon in 1822 in England. From there, fossilized skeletons started to be reconstructed, and those who collected and studied these fossils realized they resembled ancient giant lizards that had left traces in the past. This growing interest in their study led to the coining of the term dinosaur in 1942. The first discovery and identification of a dinosaur in America happened a bit later in 1858. It's important because it revealed that the creature walked on 2 feet, and this was a revolutionary discovery. Until this point, dinosaurs were thought to walk on 4 feet, like lizards. This discovery sparked the first wave of a real dinosaur mania in the United States at the end of the 19th century. There was a rush to discover new fossils and even an episode called The Bone Walls between 2 paleontologists on how to outdo each other. They resorted to bribery, theft, and even the destruction of bones, and attacks on each other's reputation to try to get rid of the competition. They would even use dynamite to unearth bones quicker. They both ended financially and socially ruined by their rivalry, and they also destroyed valuable remains along the way. But this bone war led to the discovery of many new species of dinosaurs and to new sites where fossils could be collected. Sites for dinosaur remains can be found on all continents, but apart from North America and Europe, where many early discoveries took place. Hot sites in recent decades have been China and South America, especially Argentina. the dominant competition of dinosaurs in the 19th century, based on the observation of modern reptiles and given the size of the remains, was that dinosaurs were very slow and very heavy animals. They would have been cold-blooded like lizards, but with such a big size, their metabolism would have been very slow. This conception changed starting in the 1970s, when it appeared that active predators may have been warm-blooded, which allows for much more energy and speed. The classification of dinosaurs and birds in the same family of species was also a breakthrough made possible by the approaching clades and later confirmed by the analysis of collagen found in dinosaur remains. The structure of collagen varies depending on the DNA of the species. In this case, it appears that the collagen found on a dinosaur from the Cretaceous was very similar to the collagen that ostriches or chickens generate. Returning to the appearance of dinosaurs, the truth is we don't know exactly what they look like. We probably have a good understanding of the shape of some of the largest species based on the detailed study of their skeletons. We can determine how their weight was balanced and how they moved. We can also imagine how they fought or hunted. However, we have very little idea about their color. Perhaps they were green or greenish as generally depicted, but some of them could have been very colorful if this particular feature provided an advantage in evolution. Maybe our vision will be very different in 10 years' time, because the science of dinosaurs keeps evolving. New species are named, and new discoveries are made regularly. What we know is that no non-avian dinosaur survived the end of the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous brutally ended 66 million years ago in another mass extinction that eliminated about 3/4 of all plant and animal species on Earth. Non-avian dinosaurs did not make it after the reign of about 150 million years. As far as we know, no tetrapod, an animal with 4 limbs, which includes humans, weighing more than 50 pounds, survived this extinction. Of course, no large dinosaur qualified. The cause of this mass extinction is more widely accepted than previous extinctions. In the geologic record, there is a thin layer of sediment that can be found throughout the world, corresponding to 66 million years ago, which contains a high level of iridium. Iridium is a very rare element in the Earth's crust, but relatively abundant in asteroids and comets. Therefore, it is believed that a massive asteroid or comet, about 6 to 9 miles wide, fell on Earth and devastated the global environment. It is not solely due to the shock wave. That may have played a part, but not enough to destroy ecosystems around the entire planet. The impact winter probably contributed more significantly to the devastation. All the dust propelled into the atmosphere would have plunged the planet into darkness, stopped photosynthesis in plants and plankton, and affected the entire food chain. Larger organisms were at risk of disappearing in such a scenario, and they did. The supposed site where the asteroid fell is located in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, and it is a 110-mile-wide crater. Maybe other factors than the asteroid contributed to the extinction. But in any case, non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, as did many species of mammals, pterosaurs, birds, insects, and plants. As in previous extinctions, life survived this one and immediately started to radiate again after the event, with new species occupying ecological niches left empty. The one supergroup that diversified a lot during the new period, the Paleocene, is mammals. New forms such as horses, whales, primates, or bats appeared after this extinction. The one branch of dinosaurs that made it through the extinction was birds, as I said earlier. It had started to appear long before the end of the Cretaceous. The oldest fossils that point to a transition are from the end of the Jurassic, 150 million years ago. The most famous organism showing the transition is called Archaeopteryx. It was discovered in Germany just 2 years after the publication of Darwin's most famous work titled On the Origin of Species. This book presented main principles, the foundations of his theory of evolution. At the time, it was seen as proof, a confirmation of evolution. The discovery of Archaeopteryx, even though it would be a shortcut to call Archaeopteryx the ancestor of modern birds, or the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. It is also considered today to share a common ancestor with birds, but it is not the ancestor itself. Archaeopteryx was the size of a raven, which was a relatively small dinosaur. It had feathers, and it is believed that it could fly, or at least glide. It also retained many characteristics of non-avian dinosaurs. It had teeth and a long tail that has completely receded in modern birds. It is a testimony of the appearance of feathers at some point during the Jurassic. It is called a transitional fossil. It shows a link between non-avian dinosaurs that appeared first and birds. So birds are the only branch of the dinosaur clade that survived and even thrived after the Cretaceous. In fact, in South America, the apex predator during almost the entire Holocene was a bird. But not a cute bird. From 62 to 2 million years ago, there was a big, carnivorous and flightless group of birds called Rhocidae, also known as terror birds. They stood at heights ranging from 3 to 10 feet and possessed powerful necks and beaks. It is unclear what size of prey they hunted, but for millions of years after non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, it was still a dinosaur, but a bird at the same time, that dominated the land food chain in this part of the world. From the moment dinosaurs were discovered in the 19th century, and paleontologists began to investigate them, the public was hooked by these giant creatures, and rightly so. Not just because of the size of some of them and the records they established, but for their adaptability, their variety, and the time they spent dominating the land on Earth. They did so for about 150 million years. They had millions of generations. They survived mass extinctions and climate change. The face of the Earth changed dramatically due to the continent drift during their reign. We, modern humans, now dominate our ecosystems, but this has been true for only a few thousand years, maybe tens of thousands of years. But this is nothing compared to dinosaurs. It is just a heartbeat. I'm so glad you've joined me on Lights Out Library tonight. If you'd like to listen ad-free and unlock bonus episodes, then please consider joining our Patreon. There is a link for it in the episode description. Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. It's time to take a deep, calming breath because I'm going to begin tonight's story by taking you on an accelerated journey through time, from the creation of the Earth to the period we will explore this evening, the Pleistocene epoch, also known as the Ice Age. If you wish to, you may close your eyes and forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Also, we just launched a Patreon page for those of you who wish to support this project and get more of it. If you join, you will get various new things like the possibility to listen to all episodes with background sounds or without, regular bonus episodes. There are already 2 exclusive stories for our Patreons available: The History of Glass and Stained Glass, and the story about the mysterious man in the iron mask. You will be able to download all of these audios, and you will also have your say on the choice of topics, advanced releases, and updates on upcoming episodes. We hope to see you there soon so that we may continue developing Lights Out Library, which we enjoy so much. You will find a link in the description of the podcast. But before we dive into all of this, assume a comfortable position. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you exhale, release the tension in your shoulders, your neck. Release the tension in your facial muscles too, and allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. This journey begins 4.5 billion years ago. In our small corner of the galaxy, planet Earth, like billions of other planets before it, began to form around a young star, our future sun. In the beginning, this young planet was really just a ball of liquid metal, its surface made of molten rock, rivers of lava, and volcanoes. Its geography changed quickly as it was intensely bombarded by asteroids of all sizes, and the planet acquired an internal structure and changed its appearance as a result. Its atmosphere was made of toxic gases and contained almost no traces of oxygen. No conceivable life form could exist in such a hellish environment. This was the Hadean Eon, the first age of Earth. But even though the Hadean lasted for 500 million years, it finally did come to an end 4 billion years ago when the bombardment slowed down and the planet's crust grew thicker and thicker, solidifying as the planet cooled. This primordial hell became a little quieter, and the new eon began, the Archean. The continents had formed, and they were very different in their appearance and location than they are today. Between them lay oceans of liquid water, but there was still almost no oxygen in the atmosphere, and the land was barren. There were no plants, no animals to be found anywhere on land, no witnesses to the intense volcanic activity or to the earthquakes that caused mountain chains to rise tens of thousands of feet toward the stars. This eon lasted for an inconceivable 1.5 billion years, 3 times longer than the Hadean. But something else had happened on Earth in the meantime. In shallow waters near the continent's wall, where the ocean floor was close to the surface, life had appeared. Nothing spectacular yet, just mats of organisms forming colonies. But with these microorganisms appeared a new phenomenon. They could convert the sun's light energy into chemical energy, making their life possible. This phenomenon, photosynthesis, produced oxygen as a byproduct, but still, for hundreds of millions of years, the vast oceans of Earth absorbed this oxygen, and the atmosphere stayed oxygen-free. But at some point, the water became saturated, and the excess oxygen began to escape into the atmosphere. After 1.5 billion years, the Archean eon was reaching its end, and a new age was about to begin, one even longer that would last for 2 billion years. The name that humans gave to this new eon, in which oxygen started to appear in Earth's atmosphere, is a Proterozoic, meaning earlier or former life. During this age, a new miracle happened. Life forms up until then had been single cells, but now multicellular organisms had begun to form and multiply. Maybe these organisms had appeared sooner, during the Archean, but their numbers grew exponentially during the Proterozoic. Though still very small, the multi-celled organisms were several times bigger than the more primitive organisms in which they now coexisted, and they had the effect of changing the chemical composition of the planet. Oxygen was now freely escaping the oceans and accumulating in the atmosphere. Many things continued to happen at the surface of the planet during these 2 billion years. Continents kept drifting, and the Earth's appearance continued to change. The climate changed multiple times and at various points. The Earth may have been entirely frozen, resembling a snowball traveling through space. There were still no plants or animals on land, but in the seas. As the end of the Proterozoic eon neared, the first soft-bodied animals began to colonize the oceans. We are now 550 million years in the past. We have already covered almost 90% of Earth's lifespan, and a new era was about to begin. The Phanerozoic, our era, an age of abundant animal and plant life on Earth. Abundant, to be sure, but with many ups and downs due to a constant changing planet and climate. Life radiated and grew exponentially. The first species of animals able to survive out of the water started walking on continents. Different plants covered the land and formed forests that could prosper in our oxygen-rich atmosphere. But also, multiple times after millions and millions of years, The development of life and a new species that had appeared were upset by catastrophic events, intense volcanic activity, changes in climate patterns, collisions with asteroids, and whenever this happened, life on Earth experienced big setbacks, and many species went extinct. Still, the Earth, despite its profound losses, recovered time and again from extinction events. These phases of expansion that ended abruptly are their own eras that are themselves cut into shorter periods that experienced more limited extinctions. We call these periods Cambrian Ordovician, Carboniferous, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. 12 in total have been identified and named as segments within the Phanerozoic, and they are themselves composed of shorter epochs because they still lasted millions of years. Various events and changes were observed within these long periods. Finally, 2.6 million years ago, just yesterday really on the scale of the 4.5 billion years we have just covered, one of these periods, called the Neogene, ended in glaciation. A new period, called the Quaternary. This is the period we will focus on tonight, the first epoch of the Quaternary. The Pleistocene epoch is also called the Ice Age because it was characterized by various glaciations, by expansions and withdrawals of ice sheets over the continents. But it was still an age of abundant life and the rapid evolution of species, including our own genus, Homo, which became arguably the most successful at colonizing the Earth. This ice age took place less than 12,000 years ago, and a new epoch of relative heating, the Holocene, the era in which we live now. Tonight, we will explore what the planet was like during the Ice Age, who and what lived through it, or at least what we know or can observe and deduce about it. There will be mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, of course. But what animals walked the earth and lived in the seas? I will tell you about the rise and diversification of the genus Homo, of ancient humans, and about the evolution of our species. This is a field of investigation that is continually evolving, along with our understanding of the past, and there have been many new discoveries and theories in recent decades. So bear in mind that the state of scientific consensus could and probably will keep changing. Most of what we're going to learn about tonight is not a definitive truth, but rather theories that are informed and supported by paleontology, archaeology, geology, climate science, and reasoning. But still, all those fields of study can mostly only speculate about the evidence on hand. There is no instant replay or eyewitness statements on which they can rely on. So, like them, tonight we seek to better understand the Ice Age while knowing the limits of our own understanding. Let's begin our story with a question. What did our planet look like during the Ice Age? 2.5 million years ago, a map of Earth's continents would have actually looked familiar to modern humans. Over tens or hundreds of millions of years, land masses can change dramatically because continents have time to drift apart or to collide. And they can travel thousands of miles. But 2 or 3 million years is not that much on a geological scale, and so the continents during the Ice Age were already nearly where they are today. And I will reference locations based on modern geography. However, a closer look would reveal several small differences. First, during the multiple glaciations that happened in cycles over tens of thousands of years ago, which we will discuss more later, ice sheets near the poles extended much farther than they do today. For example, in North America, all of Canada was sometimes under ice, and polar ice also covered the northern parts of the United States. Cities like Boston, New York, Chicago, Seattle would have sometimes been under ice, as were much of Siberia and western Russia on the other side of the North Pole. At peak coverage, it is estimated that about 30% of the Earth's surface was encased in ice, hence the name Ice Age. Still, during this period, tropical and equatorial regions did have much warmer climate. The implication of all of this water being locked up in ice was that many of today's islands were at the time connected to continents by land. Various straits did not exist, and overall, there was more land surface than we have now. On several occasions, North America and Asia were connected by land around the Bering Strait, allowing animals and humans to cross. Another major change that occurred just as the Pleistocene began was that North and South America became connected via the Isthmus of Panama. Prior to that, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans met at this point, separating North and South America by ocean. This new land connection between the two continents had dramatic consequences. South America had been a gigantic island for millions of years, developing its own terrestrial species that, though they could have had ancient connections with species of other continents, had evolved separately for a very long time. This new land bridge allowed an exchange of species between the two Americas. The connection probably also had a dramatic impact on the climate because it was cut off a major passage between the two largest oceans of the planet. And this changed oceanic circulation with impacts on temperature, winds, and currents. Apart from continental glaciers, glaciation also sustained a cold climate near the edges of the glacial sheet. In North America, southward from the edge of the ice, there was a permafrost zone that extended a few hundred miles. That is to say, the ground in this zone remained continually frozen below 0 degrees Celsius. In Eurasia, Siberia for the most part, the permafrost was even larger. These permafrost regions can be precious for scientists because the frozen earth can keep entire, intact specimens of extinct species frozen for thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years, provided the area doesn't warm up. This is how specimens of extinct species that are very well preserved, like mammoths and more recently a bear and a wolf, have been found and studied. Also south of the ice sheets, large lakes accumulated when the deep gouges left by retreating ice sheets then filled with ice melt. For example, this happened on a large scale in central North America with the creation of a disappeared lake called Lake Agassiz, northwest of the Great Lakes in the middle of Canada. This glacial lake, created by the melting of glaciers, was larger than the United Kingdom, or almost twice as large as Florida. It appeared at the very end of the Ice Age and is thought to have lasted only a few thousand years, until draining and evaporation left only small lakes behind. The geography of Canada and Finland, with their abundance of lakes, still bears the traces of this period. But how many of these glaciations were there and why? This is where the study of glaciers and polar caps provides interesting information, because variations in the composition of the atmosphere, like the amount of carbon dioxide and other gases, leave traces in the various layers of accumulated ice, which is where we can measure them. Study of these variations suggests that significant advances of the ice sheet, these glaciation periods, happened at intervals of approximately 40,000 to 100,000 years. In between the long glacial periods, there were shorter periods of 10 to 15,000 years. In between the long glacial periods, there were shorter periods of 10 to 15,000 years, when the climate was closer to what we expect today. These phases that repeated cyclically each had a huge impact on land and marine species and their habitats. Glaciation did not always lead to automatic extinction, but instead to migration away from the advancing continental glaciers and frozen seas, in search of warmer regions where the food could be found. But what caused these cycles of cooling and warming? It is believed that they were due to the cyclicality of climate factors at the Earth's surface. Climate, ocean currents, wind currents, temperature, and other movements follow cycles. These cycles are influenced by many factors: by the composition of the atmosphere, the motion of the planet, and its obliquity, also known as its axial tilt, which means small changes in the angle of the Earth's axis. There is also the intensity of solar radiation that varies over time, and eventually, as these multiple cycles collide and align, they converge to produce a dramatic shift in the climate. These cycles can exist for long periods of time, but they are not eternal. Each repetition includes small variations, which introduces elements of instability that can change the climate over time. For example, a pattern change was observed during the Ice Age. By the middle of it, prior to the pattern change, the periodicity of glaciations was about 40,000 years. But a climate transition happened that changed the periodicity to 100,000 years, but with more intense, more powerful cooling. A climate variation like this naturally happened had an impact on all living beings, on plants too, and that included humans, who emerged as an increasingly dominant and adaptable species during this period. So, which other species adapted best to the Ice Age? What was the fauna like? Some animals from this period are famous, like the mammoth or the smaller saber-toothed tiger, but these are just a couple of iconic animals among thousands and thousands of species, many of which still exist. Let's take a look at the kinds of animals we could have encountered during the Ice Age. A phenomenon that started millions of years earlier, the domination of land mammals, was confirmed during the Ice Age. This domination began long before the Pleistocene. Paleontology dates it from the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago. We know that birds are classified as dinosaurs because they share the same branch in the evolutionary tree. However different a T. rex and a sparrow might look, they have a single common ancestor. This is why dinosaurs are technically not extinct, but all non-avian dinosaurs, land-dwelling dinosaurs, large and small, many of them small, did not make it past the mass extinction that happened at the end of the Cretaceous. The period that followed this extinction, the Paleogene, saw life expanded and branched out, but this time with an explosion of mammals as the dominant land animals. They were dominant in the sense that they generally came out on top of the food chains, but also dominant in terms of number and presence all around the world in a variety of different environments. As you know, mammals feed their young with milk produced by mammary glands and have hair or fur. Other characteristics that are less visible include the fact that they have a neocortex, which is a region of the brain, and three middle ear bones, meaning three tiny bones that serve to transmit sounds from the air to the inner ear. All mammals have these characteristics, even though they can take different shapes. The basic mammalian body has four extremities, and most use all for terrestrial locomotion, except humans. We only use two. These extremities can be adapted for life in any and every environment on Earth. At sea, if you think of dolphins, seals, or whales. In trees, if you think of primates. Underground for rodents, or even in the air for bats. The diversity of sizes is also impressive. Mammals range from 1 or 2 inches, like the tiny bumblebee bat, to almost 100 feet for the blue whales, and yet all mammals apparently share a single ancestor. The modern order of mammals arose during the Paleogene and Neogene, and many species appeared and went extinct during that period. But the appearance of the first mammals is much older than that and emerged from a group called cynodonts. Cynodonts already had a diversity of sizes and positions in the food chain, but they tended to be small for millions of years. And they also tended to be prey rather than predators until non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, opening up an ecological niche for large mammals to replace them. There are several factors that could explain the success of mammals, including their relative intelligence and ability to learn and adapt, as well as their reproductive strategy. Mammals have few babies, but they take care of them, passing on survival skills. Mammals are also very adaptable to different environments. They can regulate their internal temperature, which requires more than food intake, but also allows them to survive in very different climates and to endure dramatic variations in temperature. So, mammals, as a group, had thrived since the Paleogene, and when the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, began, they had mostly reached their modern forms. Apart from a few extinct species of megafauna, the largest mammals, the Ice Age fauna, would have looked very familiar to us. There were apes, lions, wolves, tigers, bears, horses, elephants, all sorts of rodents, whales, dolphins, and the coastal mammals that we still know today. Other orders of mammals were also very similar to what we know today, from birds to fish to insects. So let's take a look at the mammals that did go extinct, starting with what is probably the most iconic, the mammoth. It turns out that a mammoth is not a single species. There were various species which formed a genus. And in the classification of living beings, a genus ranks above individual species. This genus, mammoth, belongs to a broader family called Elephantidae, a family that includes elephants. So mammoths and elephants were relatively close cousins. The degree of separation between them was not that big, and Elephantidae are all large terrestrial animals with a snout that has evolved into a trunk and teeth that developed into tusks. Most known species of Elephantidae went extinct thousands of years ago, and there are only two left nowadays, African and Asian elephants. Mammoths appeared around 5 million years ago, and like their cousins were herbivorous, eating only plants. Various species of mammoths populated a large part of the earth, Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, though, as far as we know, not Australia or South America, which were separated from the other continents by large bodies of water. The oldest known representative of this genus of mammals appeared in what is now southern and eastern Africa, a warm region at the time. The descendants of this species moved north and continued to propagate in every direction, covering most of Eurasia. And around 1.5 to 1.3 million years ago, they crossed to North America. Mammoths could reach impressive sizes and weights. Exceptionally large males could exceed 13 tons, or 26,000 pounds, but most of the time they were about the size of modern elephants, though they probably tended to have more hair than elephants. This is not by any means guaranteed or confirmed for all mammoth species because preserved soft tissue has rarely been found. But what is established is that they had much larger tusks and a different body shape, with humped backs and a different forehead. There were also internal differences. Mammoths are generally pictured with a thick furry coat and long hair because of a single particular species, the woolly mammoth, which first appeared 400,000 years ago. It was a late species and is rather well known thanks to the discovery of well-preserved specimens in the area where it lived in Siberia and North America. Woolly mammoths are about the size of an African elephant, so that's pretty big, and they were adapted to life on cold steppes and tundra, where they fed on grass and ferns. Woolly mammoths were probably the last species of mammoths to go extinct, only about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, but the main cause of their extinction is a bit uncertain. They were hunted by prehistoric men, and this probably at least contributed to their decline, but they also suffered a big reduction of their habitat starting 40,000 years ago due to new glaciation. Woolly mammoths were adapted to life in cold regions, but not icy regions, and since they needed to ingest large quantities of grass, the advance of the glaciers and permafrost at the surface deprived them of a vital food source, though mammoth hunting was certainly a factor too. Woolly mammoths lived in herds, could reach 60 years of age, and did not reproduce very fast, somewhat like elephants today. So, in a region where they were hunted intensively by prehistoric men, their population could have quickly declined and even disappeared. These large mammals were a source of meat, food, and bones to make tools, and one mammoth could probably feed a group for weeks, so they were very attractive prey. A relative of the mammoth that lived in North America was the mastodon, which could be mistaken for the mammoth. A common species of mammoth in North America was the Columbian mammoth, which ranged from the northern United States to Central America, and north of its territories in the Arctic regions of Canada lived the woolly mammoth. The Columbian mammoth disappeared 11 to 12,000 years ago, and here again hunting is suspected to have played a role because, for about 1,000 years, these mammoths coexisted with humans in North America. But mastodons were neither mammoths nor elephants, but they were instead distant cousins. They diverged from a common ancestor around 27 million years ago, and from there, mastodons evolved separately, though they still very much resemble the modern elephant. It is believed that mastodons lived in herds and were forest dwelling animals. An argument in favor of this is that they had very different teeth from elephants and mammoths. Theirs were cusp shaped, like human molars, and seemed well suited for chewing the leaves and branches of trees and shrubs. We don't know whether mastodons were very hairy or not. They are often depicted with a thick coat of hair like woolly mammoths, but mastodon remains have also been found in Florida and central Mexico, and though during the Pleistocene these regions were colder than they are today, they were still not freezing cold. So it seems unlikely that mastodons living in those warmer climates would have had a heavy coat of hair. Like the Columbian mammoth, the mastodon went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, possibly due to a combination of climate change and hunting. The extinction of many species of megafauna, these large herbivorous mammals like mammoths and mastodons, represent the dividing line between the Pleistocene and our epoch, the Holocene. But there were other giant terrestrial mammals that disappeared at the same time, including another genus belonging to this megafauna was the Procoptodon. This one takes us to Australia. The Procoptodon is the largest marsupial that ever existed. A marsupial is a member of a subclass of mammals that includes opossums, kangaroos, koalas, and others. Their distinctive characteristic is that they carry their young in a pouch. Due to geography and being surrounded by water, preventing species from migrating everywhere, marsupials are native to Australia, some Indonesian islands, and the Americas. They have more recently been introduced to other regions, like in New Zealand in the 19th century, but their presence in these places is due solely to human intervention. So, in the particular ecosystems of Australia that were separated from the rest of the world, marsupials thrived during the Ice Age, and their biggest representative was the Procoptodon. The largest specimens found were estimated to be 530 pounds or 240 kilograms, and they could have stood up to 6 or 7 feet tall. From 1.6 million to 44,000 years ago, they were the biggest mammals in Australia, and they could have looked like giant wombats. It is believed that Procoptodons lived in open forests and grasslands, feeding on leaves, grass, and roots, and possibly organized around a social structure that is often observed along mammals of large size. For example, with elephants, females and the young form families, whereas males leave these groups when they become adults to live alone, and they regularly fight for the right to mate with not one, but with all the females of the family. The genus Procoptodon went extinct about the same time that humans arrived. So here again, there is no proof of this, but it is suspected that Procoptodons fell prey to hunting. They were herbivorous, possibly peaceful animals that would have been tempting prey for prehistoric humans. Another well-known big mammal from the Ice Age is the Smilodon, better known as the saber-toothed cat or saber-toothed tiger. It seems, based on fossil records, that it appeared in North America, but thanks to a land bridge with South America, it also spread southward. The biggest specimens, because Smilodon is a genus with different species, were found in South America, where they could have reached sizes up to 500 to 1,000 pounds. Smaller Smilodons look like big modern tigers, minus the color of their fur, which we have no way of identifying. But what made them most visibly different from tigers was their overdeveloped canine teeth, from which they derived their nickname, saber-tooth. Their jaws had a bigger gap between the molars and the canines than any modern cat, but their canines were probably rather fragile and adapted to precision killing. Smilodon must have been a formidable predator and is believed to have hunted bison and camels that lived in the forests or mountains of North America. It is speculated that they hunted in forests and brush rather than plains, because its characteristics seem to call for ambush hunting. But this is just a guess. We also don't know if Smilodons lived in groups or alone. Like all the animals we discussed previously, the genus Smilodon did not survive the end of the Pleistocene 12,000 years ago. It was probably not hunted by humans, but the large prey it fed on could have disappeared, and competition with other species like wolves or humans could have been a cause, as well as climate change. Almost all around the world, the rise of wolves during the Ice Age created formidable competition for other predators. Individually, wolves were not as strong as smaller cats or bears, but their numbers, their social organization, collaboration, and adaptability made them very efficient predators, and certainly the main rivals of humans to dominate the continents. Humans, the genus Homo, alongside wolves, rose to dominance during and after the Ice Age. Our species, Homo sapiens, is the last remaining species. But to be clear, our family tree is not done growing and is still subject to revision. In the past few decades, there have been lots of discoveries that revealed many more branches and subspecies than previously thought. Some are well documented by bones and other remains, while others are more speculative. The timeline and geography of the expansion of the various species of Homo out of Africa is also uncertain. So I'll focus on what scientists agree upon because it is backed by plenty of evidence. But still bear in mind that these are theories, and they are subject to possible changes in the future. In the late 19th century, the theory emerged that humans descended from apes. that they were just a species subject to evolution like any other. At first, this was a very controversial idea, and it was scandalous because it went against many religious teachings and a very human centric vision of our planet's history. The idea of an evolution from apes to humans seemed radical at the time and was considered to have little credibility due to the difference in appearance, skeleton, and cognitive abilities between known apes like chimpanzees and human beings. This was simply too much. So another hypothesis was formulated, the hypothesis of a missing link, an undiscovered or extinct species that would have represented an intermediate stage of evolution. But modern scholars have left all of this behind, and with the help of the discovery of more human remains, of DNA testing, and other means of investigation like carbon dating, the current position is not that humans descended from apes, but that we are related by a common ancestor. Humans and apes are part of the same family, and if we go up in the evolutionary tree, all are part of a branch called Hominidae, a family of primates. Millions of years ago, Hominidae branched out into two subfamilies. One branch is Pongini, also known as Asian hominids, because the last existing genus of this family is orangutans, and they lived in South Asia. But representation of Pongini also used to be present in various parts of Eurasia during the Pleistocene. Another subfamily of Hominidae is Hominini with an N instead of a D, a subfamily that also split into various branches. Gorillini, including gorillas, Pan, which includes apes like chimpanzees, and bonobos, and Homo, our genus. That makes Homo a cousin branch to apes, not its descendant. The question that remains unanswered at this point is who was their last common ancestor, and when did they live? The divergence could have happened as early as 13 million years ago, long before the Ice Age. Hybridization, the possibility of cross-species reproduction, may have been going on for a very long time, possibly as recently as 4 million years ago. In any case, the Pleistocene began 2.5 million years ago. The divergence between the genus Pan, apes, and another genus called Australopithecus had already taken place. You've likely heard of Lucy, the name given to the remains of an individual discovered in Ethiopia. Lucy has been dated to about 3.2 million years ago. She was a female representative of a species of Australopithecus called Australopithecus afarensis. It is from the species Australopithecus that the genus Homo would have emerged, but the exact species of Australopithecus is unknown. There are several possible candidates from being our missing link, so Lucy may or may not be our ancestor. But even if she wasn't, she was at least close to our ancestor. Another uncertainty is the precise delineation of Homo and Australopithecus, which has become more contentious in the past few years. Historically, the advent of Homo was established with the first use of stone tools, which was thought to have happened around 2 to 2.5 million years ago, early in the Ice Age. This, at least, was the consensus in the 1980s, but more recent discoveries suggest that some species of Australopithecus may have used stone tools earlier, more than 3 million years ago, and this discovery blurs the distinction between Australopithecus and Homo. Another accepted theory that is now being challenged is the succession of different species of Homo, leading to our species, Homo sapiens, with two main links: Homo habilis, known to have used tools, followed by Homo erectus. 30 years ago, the mainstream belief was that Homo habilis was the first representative, the first species of the genus Homo, that Homo erectus had evolved from Homo habilis, and that Homo sapiens had evolved from Homo erectus. But subsequent evidence has surfaced suggesting that Homo habilis and Homo erectus coexisted for a very long time, that Homo erectus did not necessarily descend from Homo habilis, and that actually multiple species had appeared and gone extinct between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, like Homo antecessor, Homo floresiensis, the Java man, the Peking man, etc. All of this has turned the family tree of the homines into a bit of a mess. Right now, all these discoveries are stimulating, and they reveal a profusion of species, but they also leave us with many more unanswered questions. There are currently a lot of unresolved disputes in the field of paleoanthropology. But let's leave that aside and instead take a look at established species from archaic humans and what we know of them, including Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and finally, Homo sapiens. Homo habilis first appeared and lived in South and East Africa, a region that is considered to be the cradle of humanity, because this is where multiple species of Australopithecus and Homo arose. Until the 1980s, Homo habilis was considered human. But as I said earlier, this delineation is now contested, and some experts would fold Homo habilis into Australopithecus. It is still fine to refer to them as archaic humans in any case, because they certainly do exhibit characteristics that we recognize as signs of humanity. They used tools, mainly for butchering, and it is believed they formed societies of a few dozen individuals. There has been much speculation about all the organization of their societies and the assignment of gender roles between males and females. But the truth is, there is not enough evidence to form any conclusions. What we know better is how they appeared. They were relatively small, around 3 to 5 feet depending on the individual. Males were taller. They were also relatively frail compared to us, weighing only about 45 to 80 pounds. They consumed meat, which probably made up a big part of their diet, and it is believed that a large percentage of this meat came from scavenging rather than hunting. These early humans also ate fruit. We know this because measuring dental erosion on specimens reveals regular exposure to acidity. They could have spent time in trees, which is deduced from their proportions. They had long arms relative to body size, and hand bones that could have permitted precision gripping. Homo habilis could probably stand upright for a while and run, but that was certainly not their usual posture based on their anatomy. Instead, it is speculated that they alternated between standing upright and moving around on all fours. Trees could have been a good environment for them, providing shelter and safety from the threat of predators. There is no evidence to suggest that Homo habilis used fire in any sort of controlled way, but there are potential signs of an early form of architecture. In 1962, the Circle of Stones, dated to 1.7 million years ago, was discovered in Africa, wherein rocks were piled up to 6 to 9 inches high at regular intervals, and these rock piles could have been used to support poles stuck into the ground, maybe to support a rough hut or a windbreak or for another use. But the structure is man-made and as such is considered the oldest claimed evidence of architecture in the world. However, a big question mark remains as to whether Homo habilis built it, or if it was constructed by another species, because Homo habilis coexisted with others. There was Homo erectus, which we will talk about in a moment, or even Homo ergaster, an African subspecies that could have been part of Homo erectus, but which is unresolved. There is also Homo rudolfensis, another speculative species. It has been argued that the specimen could just be those of Homo habilis males because they were bigger, or the remains of Paranthropus, a late species of Australopithecus, at the time of Homo habilis. At least at the beginning, it seems Africa was the only continent where the genus lived. This changed with Homo erectus, literally upright man. Homo erectus appeared about 2 million years ago, not long after Homo habilis, and there is no doubt that this species migrated out of Africa, as plenty of remains have been found in Asia and Europe. It is unclear whether Homo erectus evolved from Homo habilis, or if they shared a common ancestor. But what we do know is that these archaic humans began to resemble us more than their predecessors. They had a flat face, a prominent nose, and possibly sparse body hair. Homo erectus was the first known human to become an apex predator. Of course, individuals could fall prey to other predators, but overall, this species rose to the top of the food chain, wherever they lived. They were active hunters and able to hunt in groups. They also cared for their injured or sick group members, a characteristic that has not been proven among previous species. And Homo erectus used fire. Individuals were, on average, taller than Homo habilis, with a size closer to Homo sapiens, and weighed 88 to 150 pounds. We only have bones to study, but it is postulated that they would have communicated with a basic proto-language made of modulated sounds. The region where Homo erectus first appeared is unknown, but it has been found in Africa, Europe, and Asia. The earliest remains were found in South Africa, and a few thousand years later in China, and this lends itself to various theories. One is that Homo erectus evolved in Africa and expanded from there. Another is that it appeared in West Asia and the Middle East before dispersing in every direction to East Asia, back to Africa, and even to Spain in the West. In any case, different subspecies have been found that illustrate the range of success of Homo erectus, well-known discoveries whose names you may have heard before, such as Java man, Homo georgicus, Peking man, and Tautavel man are generally considered part of the Homo erectus species or subspecies. However, there is an ongoing debate whether Homo erectus was a wide-ranging polymorphous species, which would simplify things a lot, or whether all these subspecies, or some of them at least, should be considered independent of one another. Still, these are collectively the dominant representatives of Homo for almost 2 million years, as the extinction of Homo erectus is dated to 100,000 to 110,000 years ago. This early example of architecture, the one I mentioned before, the stone circle found in Africa, could also well be the work of Homo erectus, given what we know of Homo erectus's increased cognitive abilities. There are, in any case, other sites with construction in various parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia that confirm that Homo erectus could build and that this species also developed the use of cave habitation. We see evidence of cave use multiplying beginning about 600,000 years ago, which indicates plenty of Homo erectus groups adopted this form of shelter. Homo erectus gave way to a new species called Homo heidelbergensis, which for a long time was considered a subspecies of Homo erectus. But Homo heidelbergensis is now increasingly considered to be its own species that evolved from an African form of Homo erectus, because there is strong evidence that Homo heidelbergensis is the common ancestor to two new species, Neanderthals or Homo neanderthalensis, and us, Homo sapiens. Homo heidelbergensis is characterized by more complex tools and by the use of fire in everyday life. For example, with this species appears hafting technology, which is the attachment of a bone or rock artifact to a handle or strap to make, for example, a spear or an axe. This aligns with the emergence of Homo heidelbergensis, and signs of the technology's presence has been observed in Africa and in Europe. At a time, and this is still disputed, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens would have evolved from Homo heidelbergensis. Neanderthals appeared first, maybe as early as 800,000 years ago, but the oldest remains have been dated to 300 to 400,000 years ago. Neanderthals appeared and lived in Eurasia, based on known remains, and lasted until about 40,000 years ago. There is an ongoing debate here again about why they went extinct and if they actually disappeared, because they had a relatively small population and they could have been bred into extinction or assimilated by Homo sapiens. In any case, modern humans still carry Neanderthals' genome in various proportions depending on their region of origin. Bear in mind that in these waves of ancient human migration out of Africa and maybe back again, various species coexisted at the same time and could have reproduced. There were waves of species, but also a lot of mixing. Now, in popular culture, Neanderthals remain attached to the image of the unevolved caveman archetype. But when they first appear, they were the most evolved human species in terms of cognitive abilities, and in many ways were probably not very different from Homo sapiens. Their technology was sophisticated, way more so than Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. To give you examples, Neanderthals could make fire, not just sustain it. They built homes in caves. They made simple clothes similar to blankets or ponchos. They could also weave. They had different cooking techniques, including roasting, boiling, or smoking. They knew some medicinal plants. They went seafaring on the Mediterranean, and maybe another evolutionary quality that makes them like us is the possible development of symbolic thought among them. This is still very controversial because it is unclear whether these attributes can be attributed to Neanderthals. However, a number of discoveries hint that maybe they made ornaments with feathers or shells, and possibly even music. They might have collected unusual objects like crystals or fossils, although this also remains uncertain. In any case, their brain size was in the range of modern humans, and their anatomy had only limited differences compared to ours, such as a more elongated skull, for reasons that are not precisely known. They never formed a large population, only small groups, and this could be the reason for their absorption by Homo sapiens. While Neanderthal populations were spreading to Europe and Asia, a new species was appearing in Africa, Homo sapiens. As a species, Neanderthals probably evolved somewhere between Europe and Asia, and as we have seen before, could have appeared out of Africa. But modern humans appeared in East Africa, near the cradle of Australopithecus and of many iterations of hominids. This would have happened around 300,000 years ago, later than Neanderthals. But since they had common ancestors, the two species were generally compatible for reproduction. Of course, you can just look in the mirror to know what Homo sapiens looks like. This is what we all are. But what distinguished Homo sapiens from archaic humans was our cognitive and social abilities, not just technical, but also behavioral skills. At a time estimated to be 160 to 170,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began to exhibit what paleoanthropologists call behavioral modernity. This is a term created to name a series of traits that distinguish Homo sapiens from other, more ancient humans. These traits include abstract thinking, the ability to plan for long periods of time, symbolic behaviors such as the production of ornamentation and art, and expression through music and dance, traits that are not directly necessary for survival. Homo sapiens also achieved more advanced technological breakthroughs, like the use of blades, for example. The first generations of Homo sapiens lived in East Africa, and from there they spread with such a success that they ended up occupying all continents and major islands of the world. They spread in several waves, replacing or absorbing all other human groups in the process, first to South Africa, then West Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. 65,000 years ago. They were in India and shortly after in Australia, Europe, and China before crossing to North America. via northern routes and then all the way to South America. By the end of the Ice Age, some 12,000 years ago, humans had taken possession of the Earth. The last glaciation was ending. The climate was changing, and the flora and fauna transformed the Earth into one recognizable by modern humans. Prehistory would soon end. Countless inventions would follow. At some point, thousands of years later, metals would replace stone, ending the Stone Age. Human societies would develop elaborate and complex systems of thought. They would build fire, fight, create, and exploit the planet and each other. The time for the beginning of recorded human history was nearing, but that is a story for another time. We've come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep, or you can pick another story from my library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.